In the biting winter of 1944, Europe was gripped by the coldest season in 30 years. In this icy hell, the legendary 101st Airborne Division found themselves cornered, trapped in the Belgian town of Bastogne by a German juggernaut twice their size. The American warriors, battered and stretched to their limits, dug in their heels to defend the frozen town and safeguard the civilians caught in the crossfire. On the northeastern fringes of Bastogne, Easy Company fought tooth and nail to hold their ground, despite losing more brothers to the cruel bite of frostbite and the depths of despair than to the enemy's bullets. Clad in worn-out gear, their stomachs empty, they faced off against the howling winds that slashed at their flesh like knives. The German Ardennes Offensive blindsided the Allies, a staggering blow they never saw coming from the war-weary Wehrmacht. Now, the German forces loomed, poised to crush the encircled 101st Airborne Division. In the face of these harrowing odds, General Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz laid down an ultimatum to Bastogne's commanding officer, General Anthony McAuliffe: surrender or be obliterated. McAuliffe's reply was a defiant roar of resistance. They would stand their ground to the very end. As the screaming eagles steeled themselves for the tempest ahead, General Patton charged northward in a frantic bid to break through to Bastogne. But just 2 days from the city, the savage winter put a stop to his efforts. The clock was ticking. The 101st had to endure the full fury of the Wehrmacht or face total destruction. After the devastating blow dealt to Germany at Stalingrad, Hitler was backed into a corner, scrambling to divert the Allies' attention from the Eastern Front. The relentless Soviet juggernaut was bleeding Germany dry, and Hitler, grasping at straws, saw the shaky Anglo-American alliance as a potential weak link. Betting all or nothing, he hatched a plan for a blistering strike against the Western forces. He hoped to fracture their union or strong-arm them into a peace deal, freeing his hands to wrestle down the Soviet bear. Despite the Reich's tank running on fumes, strategic resources dwindling, soldiers spread thin, and war machines limping, Hitler gave the nod for a lightning thrust through the Ardennes. This gambit, which would go down in history as the Battle of the Bulge, had one aim: to cleave through the Allied lines, snatch Antwerp, and send the Allies packing in a Dunkirk-style rout. Under the cloak of darkness, German forces marshaled their strength, vanishing into the daybreak to meld with the local scenery in towns and hamlets, their war machines disguised from prying eyes. Meanwhile, infamous German SS commando Otto Skorzeny, leading Operation Greif, wove a web of sabotage behind the lines, kinking the Allies' supply chain, scrambling their signals and sowing discord. On the frosty morning of December 16, 1944, the Germans sprang from their trap. Sepp Dietrich's 6th Panzer Army hurled itself at the American defenders with a ferocity that shattered the silence, while Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army forded the Sauer, catching the Americans flat-footed in their foxholes. The assault was a maelstrom of steel and fire, sending green American recruits reeling, their lines buckling under the German onslaught. The Ardennes transformed into a hellish battlefield where the unseasoned Allies tasted the bitter dregs of chaos. As the German war machine clawed its way forward, it scored a series of bruising victories, pushing a bulge into the Allied front. Yet victory came at a steep price. Allied mines made mincemeat of German tanks, while the bitter clutch of winter grounded the Luftwaffe, leaving Hitler's daring offensive gasping for air. In a decisive counter to the German onslaught, General Dwight Eisenhower played his hand, rallying the reserves. He deployed the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions straight into the heart of the storm at Bastogne. As the German tide surged, creating a menacing bulge, it was momentarily checked at the Meuse River, but just barely. If nothing changed, the region would be overrun. The German advance bore down with crushing force. Bastogne, freshly liberated by US forces, suddenly found itself in the shadow of the Third Reich's iron fist once again. The Gestapo slithered back into the lives of those who had just begun to taste freedom, marking the return of nightmarish oppression. In the quiet village of Bourcy, a handmade American flag, crafted from scraps of cloth to celebrate the arrival of American troops, became a death warrant for Marcel Rolland. Found in the Roland family's cellar, this flag drew the Gestapo's wrath. Dragged to an interrogation chamber, Marcel's screams tore through the village as he was subjected to unspeakable brutality. His ordeal ended in a muddy execution ground, a chilling prelude to the fate that awaited Bastogne should it fall once more. With Bastogne besieged on December 21st, the 101st Airborne stood as the city's last hope, facing down a sea of encroaching German forces. The spectre of annihilation loomed large over the American defenders, their situation growing more desperate by the hour. In this dire hour, General George S. Patton's 4th Armored Division, engines roaring and spirits ablaze, embarked on a hell-for-leather dash across the treacherous ground. They were on a race against time and terrain to break the siege of Bastogne. Patton's tanks were striving to avert a catastrophe, to reach the 101st before the German vise could clamp shut, sealing the fate of Bastogne and its defenders in the grip of iron and ice. In the run-up to the Battle of the Bulge, several warning signs flickered on the radar, ominous signals that the Ardennes were about to become a crucible of combat. Yet, American commanders, buoyed by a mix of confidence and underestimation of the enemy, brushed aside the idea that the Germans could muster the strength for a large-scale offensive. This overconfidence left them blindsided when the German juggernaut unleashed its fury on December 16, 1944. The clock was ticking for the Germans. Their blitz through the Ardennes aimed squarely at Antwerp needed swift execution before the Allies could bring their superior air power to bear. Control of the highways slicing through eastern Belgium was critical. The German panzers had to bulldoze through without delay. Bastogne, a seemingly modest town nestled at the heart of the Ardennes, emerged as a linchpin in this high-stakes race to turn the tides. Its strategic importance lay in the convergence of 7 main roads, making it the linchpin for mobility and supply. To tip the scales of the offensive in their favor, the Germans needed Bastogne's crossroads in their grip. As the battle raged, the 28th Infantry Division teetered on the edge of collapse by day 2. The stakes couldn't be higher. Losing Bastogne would spell disaster, potentially unraveling the hard-fought gains since the Normandy breakout. Major General Troy H. Middleton, sensing the gravity, threw Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division into the fray, a decisive move to hold Bastogne against the onslaught. Simultaneously, General Dwight Eisenhower, grappling with the initial shock of the German push, played his ace. He called up the Schaeff Reserve, the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, the cream of the airborne forces stationed at Reims. With the weather grounding any hope of an aerial deployment, the divisions mobilized in an impressive convoy, wheels rolling towards destiny on the afternoon of December 18th. The 101st Airborne was bound for Bastogne, while the 82nd Airborne set its sights on blunting Kampfgruppe Piper's drive toward Wehrmacht. Arriving just in the nick of time on December 19th, as German forces prowled the outskirts, the 101st Airborne was charged with a mission as clear as it was daunting: hold Bastogne, no matter the cost. As dawn broke on December 19, 1944, the snow-covered roads of Bastogne bore witness to a defiant parade of reinforcements. Private Howard Buford, a fresh-faced paratrooper with the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, embodied the unbreakable spirit of the Screaming Eagles. Amid the fatigue-laden faces of GIs who had borne the brunt of the initial onslaught, Buford's voice rang out, quote, "Don't worry, guys. The Airborne is here." Despite his greenness to combat, Buford's confidence in his unit was unshakable. He was convinced that they were about to introduce the Germans to airborne tenacity. The welcome they received as they marched through Bastogne was heartwarming. Buford's memoirs capture the moment vividly. Quote, "People were cheering and clapping as we marched through." Buford's platoon soon found themselves in the woods near the village of Baisery, staking out a defensive position on a sloped field as the German forces cinched their grip around Bastogne. The numbers of the enemy seemed overwhelming, a stark reminder of the desperate straits they were in. Digging in at the bottom of a hill, Buford and his fellow machine gunner prepared for the inevitable clash. The German attempt to pierce the American line soon came, a maelstrom of small arms fire that filled the air. Buford recounts, quote, "American machine guns went put, while German machine guns went f. The firefight atop the hill was only 200 to 300 feet away. Though the Germans managed to snatch a paratrooper from a neighboring foxhole, the American line held firm. Buford and Easy Company found themselves entrenched in a forest crisscrossed by dirt roads, an environment that stymied the German preference for armored assaults. In these woods, the war was waged one squad, one platoon at a time, as both sides engaged in relentless skirmishes that tested the mettle of every soldier. This crucible of conflict, where every tree could conceal an enemy and every shadow could spell death, became the home of the men from the 101st. Within the besieged circle of Bastogne, the situation turned dire as the cruel winter waged war as fiercely as the enemy. On December 19th, a critical blow was dealt to the American defenders when a large portion of their medical supplies and personnel fell into enemy hands. This loss left the garrison precariously thin on life-saving resources. The Germans, smelling blood, launched relentless probing attacks. Their strategy was clear: to circle the wagons, find the cracks in the American defenses, and break through. Day and night, the perimeter was tested, the cold unyielding, as the defenders faced a relentless assault that chiseled away at their numbers and morale. Injuries mounted, and with the medical cupboard nearly bare, many wounded GIs stared down the grim reaper with stoic resolve, their situation growing increasingly desperate. Yet in this hour of need, a glimmer of hope shone through the darkness. Augusta Chiwi and René Lemaire, two courageous local nurses, stepped up. Volunteering to aid the beleaguered 10th Armored Division, they became beacons of light in the encroaching gloom. With the scant medical supplies at hand, they set up a makeshift hospital amidst the chaos, their efforts buoying the spirits of the men and offering crucial care to the wounded. The relentless combat, punctuated by the deafening roar of German artillery, began to fray Private Howard Buford's nerves to their breaking point. Quote, "When we would get a chance to eat, I would get away from my foxhole and throw up." Enduring life amidst the bone-chilling cold, snow and ice was a special kind of hell. One evening, the squad pulled back far enough to kindle a roaring bonfire. They stood with their backs to the flames, letting the heat melt the snow on their army overcoats, drenching them. When they spun around to thaw their hands, their backs would freeze solid. Buford grew to detest the army's K-rations, meals that require no cooking, packed with cheese, meat, crackers, chocolate, and smokes. He recalled, quote, "The first time you ate them, they weren't bad, but you couldn't eat them 3 or 4 days straight. They were terrible." Eventually, Buford and his squadmates limited themselves to just the K-ration chocolate bars. Buford's platoon did get some artillery backup, but the American gunners were running on empty. The squad leaned heavily on their mortars for immediate support. Fighter planes attempted to skirt beneath the dense overcast, but held their fire, unable to spot the Germans. Buford, like countless soldiers, felt the cold grip of fear in combat. His hair-raising moment came while crawling through a gap at the base of a wall near a stack of deceased horses. Following his entire platoon and his lieutenant, that's when the mortars started raining down. Quote, "You could tell when artillery was inbound by its sound and hit the dirt. Mortars, though, they drop in silent but deadly, straight from the sky with just a whisper," he described. The two took shelter by the horses until the mortars ceased, and then they scrambled through the gap. In the rush, Buford snagged his machine gun, inadvertently cocking it. He dashed from house to house through the town, spotting a fallen German in the street when the unexpected happened. Buford detailed, quote, "My hand was on the machine gun, a twitch of my finger, and it discharged right beside my ear." The accidental firing scared the daylights out of him, freezing him in his tracks in the open before he snapped back to reality and dashed for cover. Later, he became the butt of jokes for that blunder. Irritated by the deadlock in Bastogne, General Lutwitz, the mastermind commanding the forces encircling the town, ordered a full-scale attack on its entire perimeter on December 22nd. Despite the Germans seizing roads and villages through relentless and coordinated assaults, they faced stiff American counterattacks and resistance. With the Ardennes push grinding to a halt and Luttwitz's resources spread thin in terms of supplies and manpower, he realized crushing the 101st Airborne Division was off the table. Unbeknownst to the Americans, Luttwitz played his hand, issuing a bone-chilling ultimatum: capitulate within 2 hours or brace for total destruction. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe received the ultimatum and replied with a singular, defiant retort, quote, "Nuts." The cryptic response was formally conveyed to the German emissaries, who were baffled. McAuliffe's aides clarified, quote, "It means go to hell, and here's something else. If you keep on attacking, we'll wipe out every damn German trying to storm this town." When Buford and his fellow paratroopers caught wind of the ultimatum, Buford recalled, quote, "Everyone cracked up. We were top-tier fighters. Surrendering didn't even cross our minds." McAuliffe's spirited rebuff significantly lifted the American spirits while it got under the German skin, revealing their ruse had been exposed. Anticipating a drawn-out siege, the 10th Armored Division's Combat Command B, though battered, rallied 40 light and medium tanks into a fire brigade. 3 makeshift artillery battalions, including the distinguished all-black 969th Field Artillery Battalion, assembled a provisional artillery group to bolster the 101st. Yet, the scant ammo supplies curtailed their fire support. Despite the morale boost, the American defenders were teetering on the brink of running out of ammo. Down south, General George Patton had pulled off a miracle, maneuvering the bulk of his forces, ready to punch through the German lines within 48 hours. His troops had marched relentlessly through snow, mud and rain, defying every expectation to relieve their besieged brothers in a feat that seemed unfathomable. Yet persistent foul weather thwarted their progress. On December 22nd, Patton had his men distribute a prayer his chaplain penned, begging for clear skies to engage the enemy. Miraculously, on the following day, the American troops woke to clear skies. An extensive resupply drop was immediately slated to bolster the 101st Airborne Division, signaling a turning tide in the grim standoff at Bastogne. On December 23rd, the skies over Bastogne turned into a battlefield as 249 American transport aircraft, C-47 Skytrains, raced towards the city, their bays loaded with supplies for its beleaguered defenders. Flanked by a squadron of P-47 Thunderbolts, these escorts put on a masterclass in aerial combat, engaging German fighters trying to cut off the lifeline to the city. Buford marveled, quote, "Thunderbolts came in so close you could throw a rock and it would hit them." Though he admitted, despite the airdrops, he never laid eyes on the transport planes himself, only catching wind of them through the grapevine among his fellow paratroopers. Despite the threat of German anti-aircraft fire and the Luftwaffe's desperate attempts to intercept them, only 7 cargo planes were lost. The vast majority succeeded in dropping their vital cargoes. Troops on the ground, their spirits lifted, managed to secure 95% of the dropped ammunition, food, and other supplies, bolstering their resolve to hold the city for the weeks that followed. The transport planes winged their way back home, but their fighter escorts remained vigilant in the skies, providing crucial air support for the city's defenders. From that point on, the US flexed its air superiority in the region, relentlessly hammering the already beleaguered German forces encircling Bastogne, effectively silencing nearly all attempts to shell the city. Outnumbered and outgunned, the German forces mounted a series of desperate attacks, each one breaking against the newly resupplied and unwavering American lines. On Christmas Eve, in a ferocious final attempt, the Luftwaffe struck at the heart of Bastogne, one bomb tragically demolishing the makeshift hospital. This strike claimed the lives of René Lemaire and 30 American soldiers. In a heart-rending twist, René's body was covered with the white parachute she had once dreamed of fashioning into her wedding dress. The valor and sacrifice of these 2 women, dubbed the Angels of Bastogne, were seared into memory. Their names became emblems of altruism and bravery in the battle's aftermath. With the skies clear and the invaluable support of US air power, General George Patton's forces steamrolled towards Bastogne. sweeping aside any German resistance that dared to block their path. On December 26th, Patton's armor, leading with a thunderous artillery and napalm barrage, shattered the German encirclement. Cobra King, a battle-scarred Sherman tank, spearheaded the breakthrough, marking the first crack in the siege. From there, the tide turned in favor of the Americans. Buford recounts, quote, "We hit the Germans and were pushing them back." Radio operators coordinated artillery strikes 300 yards ahead of the advance, gradually pulling the barrage back towards their own lines. Paratroopers ducked for cover as the shells burst overhead, shredding through German defenses. After a day of relentless pushing, Buford's unit regrouped, setting the rhythm for the campaign's remaining battles. For easy company, Patton's breakthrough also heralded the arrival of much-needed hot meals. Delivered under cover of darkness in insulated mermite cans, the food was a jumbled feast. Buford remembers, quote, "They would dump meat, potatoes, gravy and jello on top of each other. We were so beat, we were just grateful for the grub. No gripes from anyone." The lifting of the siege and the crippling of the Ardennes Offensive marked the beginning of the end for Germany's last significant push in World War II, a decisive turn towards Allied victory. Yet the stand at Bastogne was costly. The 101st Airborne Division paid a heavy price from December 19, 1944 to January 6, 1945. 341 lost, 1,691 wounded, and 516 missing in action. Their pivotal defense of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge earned several regiments within the 101st the moniker the Battered Bastards of Bastogne. Their unyielding spirit and determination under dire conditions stand as a lasting tribute to the resilience and valor of American soldiers in one of World War II's most brutal confrontations.